if you do these things and stick with your aerobic zone, believe me, you are going to progress. So in this video, I'm going through the details you'll need to start your aerobic sessions. Now the aim of these aerobic sessions is to increase the efficiency of your aerobic system and for you to establish an aerobic base, which all of your future training and perhaps your future trips, expeditions or events will depend upon. So it's a very important part of the training. So in this video, I'm going to go through and give you a couple of different options for aerobic training, and I'm also going to help you establish your aerobic zone. We're going to do that at the end of the video using the 180 formula. But let's get started with covering, warming up and cooling down. So whenever you start a training session, particularly an aerobic training session, we want to start very slowly and build up very gradually, usually over a 15-minute period. What I recommend you do is start with a brisk walk and perhaps adding some light mobility drills along the way as your heart rate starts to increase. But the aim of these drills is not to increase your mobility, it's to encourage the blood away from your digestive organs, away from your brain, and into your musculature and into the aerobic organs like your heart and your lungs. And it takes a lot of time for that blood to be detoured away from your digestive organs, and it takes about 12 to 15 minutes. So you'll notice if you've gone straight into intense exercise before, you don't feel very good, and that's because your heart rate's spiking and your body's just not catching up. So when you start your warm-up, you want to keep kind of glancing at your heart rate monitor to make sure you're kind of very slowly moving up between the 70s, 80s, 90s, into the hundreds, and all the way up to your aerobic zone. But you don't want to see big spikes. This wants to happen very, very gradually. So on the screen now, you can see that I've got a little graph here demonstrating what your heart rate should look like as we go through our warm-up. And we want to really keep within that zone during your entire aerobic session. And the exact same thing works for cooling down. You don't just want to get straight home and lie on the couch and freeze up. What you want to do is slowly drop your heart rate over time, and guaranteed you will feel much better when you do this, and you'll perform better in your training the next day, because we want to have time for the blood to be able to go back to the digestive organs, to go back into rest and digest, and to get our recovery started. If we don't do that, then we're just simply not going to perform very well the next day. And consistency is one of the most important things when it comes to this, especially with aerobic training. So now we're going to get into some of the methods that I recommend for carrying out your aerobic training. I've chosen these examples as they are the most relevant to hikers and climbers, but also because no matter what your personal circumstances are, no matter what equipment you have, your level of fitness, guaranteed one of these options is going to work well for you. Now the first on the list is obviously hiking. Now if you look at any blog post, it'll tell you that the best training you can do for hiking is going hiking, and I don't disagree with them, but there is some things you need to understand about hiking, and especially how it relates to aerobic training. So it is by far the most relevant aerobic activity for hikers and mountaineers, but the main issue here is that most people can't hike 3 to 4 times a week, and that's how often we need to be doing our aerobic training. So hike as much as you can, but more than likely you're going to need to supplement this with some other aerobic methods. The second issue with hiking as aerobic training is that it can be difficult to maintain a very consistent heart rate over this kind of varying terrain that we typically have when we're hiking. Perhaps hiking a relatively flat circuit is the best option, trying to decrease your lap time every time without going so fast that your heart rate exceeds your aerobic zone. Another option which I like is to find a nearby hill and perform hill repeats on that hill. This is great for both building physical and mental fitness. The drawbacks are that your heart rate will naturally drop when you go to the downhill section, so you have to adjust your speed and the length of hill that you're doing to help you remain in your aerobic zone, because that can be really tricky. So aside from hiking, what else can we do for our aerobic training? Well, my second option, and a great one, is using stairs. Stair climbing is great because it's very measurable, it's a very predictable environment, meaning we can really adjust the intensity to a fine degree to be able to remain very steadily in our aerobic zone. We have the benefit of training both the uphill and downhill component, meaning that we're building capabilities and going downhill, as opposed to training on a Stairmaster, which only trains you in one direction. The drawbacks of this are that, much like hill repeats, your heart rate will naturally drop when you do the downhill section of the stairs, so you just have to adjust the speed and the amount of stairs that you climb in the same way that you would when you're doing your hill repeats. The third and perhaps the most scientifically accurate version of doing your aerobic training is by jumping on a treadmill. Most treadmills will allow very minute changes in inclination and speed, which will really enable you to dial in your aerobic zone and stay there for the designated time without the interruption of having to turn around and go down. The flip side to this is that you are only training on the uphill, but as long as you're also doing the targeted strength work in my programs, then you shouldn't have to worry too much about that. The fourth method of aerobic training, and perhaps my personal favorite, is trail running. Trail running is preferable to road running due to the more forgiving nature of trails when compared to the road, which can be very hard on joints, particularly the knees. Trail running is also beneficial as it trains your proprioception and your agility, whilst also being highly relevant and an effective method of aerobic training for mountain athletes. Staying in your aerobic zone can be tricky though, so you have to alter your speed a lot as the terrain changes. Sometimes you'll need to slow down to a walk to be able to maintain and remain in your aerobic zone. And I get it, this is obviously not for everyone. For years I didn't enjoy running, and if you do have access to trails and you're training for hiking, you're much more likely to just choose hiking, but it's an option there for everyone and it is a good way to progress. But totally up to you. It will of course depend on your current level of fitness and your experience on trail. So it's there for you if you want to use it. The fifth and final method of aerobic training is cardio machines in general. So outside of the treadmill, we have other cardiovascular machines like the elliptical trainer, we have assault bike, stationary cycle, rower. These are all good options to be using for your aerobic training. The upside of using these machines is that it's very easy for you to really dial in and stay in your aerobic zone. Cardio machines like the elliptical trainers, Stairmaster and cross trainer are good options as it is fairly easy for you to stay in your aerobic zone. Others like the cycling machines or rowing machines are less relevant to hiking because they're based on sitting rather than being on your feet. And when you train on your feet, you're getting the extra benefit of the muscular conditioning, particularly in the feet. So any weight-bearing exercise done on your feet is likely to be far more beneficial to hiking than you would be sitting in the saddle of a bike, for instance. The same weight-bearing argument can be used for swimming, which is of course a great exercise and great for adding variety, but it's not something you want to base all of your training on. I've got a pool here in my hometown and I love jumping in the pool and doing some laps, but it's not something I'm going to base all my training on because it just doesn't have that carryover to hiking and mountaineering. So if you're already a cyclist or a swimmer and you love it, then by all means go ahead. It's still great training. It's just perhaps not optimal for hiking and mountaineering. But having said that, I think there's nothing wrong with a bit of variety and it certainly helps to keep it interesting. And at the end of the day, the most effective training for you is the one that you enjoy and the one that you actually do. So if you need to add more variety to these aerobic sessions, go ahead, just stay in your aerobic zone. So there you have it. There's a bunch of different options that you can implement into your aerobic-based training. Now I'm going to go through 3 of the main ways that we can vary our intensity to be able to keep us exactly where we want to be in our aerobic training. And the first one of those is speed. So adjusting your speed is the simplest way to adjust your overall intensity to help you stay in your aerobic zone. So keep an eye on your watch and your own internal indicators within your body as you train. If you start panting, sweating and generally feeling fatigued, then that's a good sign that you're working too hard. Now if you don't have a watch with a heart rate monitor and a chest strap, then it does become very difficult to determine whether you're working hard enough. So again, it's something I really highly recommend to make sure you get a good heart rate monitor with a chest strap. Believe me, it's totally worth the money you spend and you still can get them cheap online secondhand. So it's definitely something that I recommend you do if you haven't got one already. The second way that we can vary our intensity is by inclination. When it comes to hiking and mountaineering, the steepness of the trail is one of the things that really gives us trouble. So if you're working too hard, find a flatter trail. If you're not working hard enough and your heart rate is too low, then we need to find something a little bit steeper to get you up in that zone. The third and final way that we can vary our intensity when we're doing these sessions is pack weight or any weight bearing you have on your body when you're doing these exercises. This is a tough one to adjust throughout the session, so if you're hiking, the best way to adjust your pack weight is by carrying containers of water, because you can ditch the water or fill up from a stream along the way to fine tune what you want to carry with you. So depending on which type of aerobic training you choose to do, you can either increase your speed, your inclination or your pack weight. as dials to increase or decrease your heart rate as needed to help you stay in your aerobic zone. So the final element that I want to touch on in this video is how to progress and periodize your aerobic training over time. So you'll see in the program that I've laid out for you a recommended starting level which will gradually increase over the period of your training, with the exception of the rest weeks where we deload to allow your body to rest and digest and recover. This is incredibly important. You can't continually increase the amount of exercise you're doing without allowing for these rest weeks. You'll simply be too tired, you'll be overworked, and you won't be able to rest and recover to wake up and do the training the next day. Now, one thing I want to make clear, there's a very big difference between having a bad week and not getting much training done and your rest week. So don't simply skip the rest week just because you've skipped a couple of sessions in the previous week. What we need to do is have a very structured deload week where we're doing about 30% of our overall volume, but still being very consistent through that week. So if you have skipped a few sessions, just don't move on in the training program. Do them one after the other. And if you fall off the bandwagon, just jump back on and pick up where you left off and then stick to your deload week. It's very important. So that's almost it for this video, guys. The final thing we're going to do is just go through the 180 formula with you. If you hadn't already, I'm going to read out the questions to you. So grab a pen, maybe a calculator if you're not too sharp with the maths, and we'll establish your aerobic zone. What we're going to do is we'll firstly subtract your age from the number 180. From there, we're going to go through a series of questions, and you're going to either subtract or add numbers to that number based off the answer to those questions. So let's dive into the questions. Here we go. So if you're recovering from a major illness, for example, heart disease, any operation or a hospital stay, or you are on any regular medication, subtract an additional 10. If you have injured, if you've regressed in training or any competitions that you do, if you get more than 2 colds or bouts of flu per year, if you have allergies or asthma, or if you've been inconsistent or just getting back into training, then subtract an additional 5. If you've been training consistently for at least 4 times weekly for up to 2 years without any of the problems in A or B, keep the number, that's 180 minus your age, exactly the same. If you've been training for more than 2 years without any of the problems in A and B and have made progress in competition without injury, add 5. I think very few people can say they would be able to do that. So the most important thing with this is to err on the side of caution. If it's difficult for you to decide which of these 2 groups best fits you, then choose the group or outcome that results in the lower heart rate. So whichever number you ended up from using this questionnaire is your maximum aerobic heart rate. Now your aerobic zone is that number minus 10. So let's say if you ended up with your maximum aerobic heart rate as 145, then your aerobic zone will be 135 to 145. So all of your aerobic zone training should stay within minus 10 BPM of that number that we established doing this questionnaire. So write that down on your program or on a piece of paper, commit it to memory, plug it into your watch. You can adjust your aerobic zones to beep and tell you when you're coming in and out of your zone. If you do these things and stick with your aerobic zone, believe me, you are going to progress. At first, it may feel very low and very difficult for you to operate at this level, which is perhaps much lower than you have in the past. But if there's one thing that I've learned coaching people for almost a decade, is that you get much more benefit from working consistently at a lower level than you do flogging yourself and training to 100% every single session. So guys, take this advice from Dr. Maffetone, implement it, and give it some time. This stuff takes, 2, 3, 4 months. Over a year, I would suggest doing 4 months of aerobic base building if you're really, really serious about becoming a mountain athlete and progressing over the long term. Guys, that's it for this video. I will see you on the summit.